on Sunday, the 26th, it's going to be the full moon, and the full moon in May is a very significant time for Buddhists throughout the world of all traditions. It is a time when we remember with gratitude and appreciation the teacher, the Buddha, because he was born on a full moon in May. He also obtained enlightenment on the full moon in May, and he passed away in May on the full moon. And so this is a ceremony which we call Visakha ceremony. It is the ceremony of the recollection of the Buddha's birth, enlightenment and parinibbana, final passing away. And because it is such an important and significant event, this weekend there will be many services and celebrations around this event, and because many of you may be unfamiliar with the life of the Buddha and especially the period of his passing away, I thought this evening to take one of the discourses, one of the longest discourses, which recalls and remembers the events of the Buddha's last days and the teachings he gave, particularly in those last days. I want to present this discourse on the last days of the Buddha from the Mahaparinibbana Sutta by giving a commentary and giving you some information and background and filling in around the events, and then also reading the very words of the Buddha on those relevant parts of the discourse. For those who are unfamiliar with the life of the Buddha lived to an age of 80. He was enlightened at the age of 35, and so he taught for 45 years, wandering throughout Middle India and Northern India, teaching those people who were interested and when he was invited. This discourse on the last days of the Buddha, there is a lot of Dhamma teachings in that, and it seems to be a period that Buddha knew he was going to pass away. He actually predicted his death and announced it 3 months before the events that he will pass away on the full moon in May. And in those last 3 months he travelled extensively, meeting with monks and lay people and nuns, and often reiterated and emphasized very poignant parts of his teaching that he'd been teaching for 45 years. So in this discourse there is often the most important teachings of the Buddha, as well as an emphasis where he is trying to remind people of his teachings, what's important, what you should remember before he passes away. Also, he summarizes to the listeners those teachings, and he also points out the essence of his teachings and gives some final guidance and advice. I will begin this by giving you a bit of background. The discourse begins, that is the discourse on the Buddha's last days, begins in a period of political turmoil in the area of Magadha, that's central northern India. At that time, the kings of the area were planning to go to war, and there was a lot of political strife looming. And because of that, those conditions, the beginning of the discourse starts with the Buddha talking about those conditions for social stability and those conditions for harmony. And he then gives guidance to the monks on conditions for their welfare and growth and benefit, and those conditions that lead to their happiness and their prosperity, and those conditions which lead away from decline. I will not go in the details of that, but begin where the Buddha starts to then give an analysis and a summary of his teachings. And I will go on to describe those. And so the Buddha is abiding at the area in India called Rajagaha, which was a very ancient and very powerful kingdom and capital of one of the great kings at that time. And he lived on a mountaintop around the outskirts of the city called the Vulture's Peak. And it's a mountain which has a large rocky outcrop which looks like a vulture's head. And of those of you who have been to India, you can still see the remnants of the Buddha's kuti that exists on the top of that Vulture's Peak to this day. That is these brick remnants of the foundation stone of his hut where he abided. And so when the Blessed One was living on the Vulture's Peak, he spoke to the monks and said, "This is morality, this is concentration, this is wisdom. Concentration, when imbued with morality, brings great fruit and profit. Wisdom, when imbued with concentration, brings great fruit and profit. The mind imbued with wisdom becomes completely free from corruptions, that is, from the corruptions of sensuality, of becoming, of false views, and of ignorance." So the Buddha is summarizing his pathway to enlightenment. And his pathway to enlightenment is describing as based in virtue, in morality. It is based in peace and concentration, and it is based in wisdom. And they work together. Those three things must work together. So it is not good enough, if one aspires to enlightenment, to say, just meditate. One also has to support meditation with virtue and goodness. Virtue and goodness is the very supports for peaceful states of mind. And wisdom, when it is supported by peaceful states of mind, serenity, calmness, and one-pointedness, that brings great fruit and benefit, because the power of the mind to see something clearly then is able to hold that object for a long period of time and therefore know it as it really is. So when you can sustain the mind on one thing for a long period of time, then the mind becomes pure, the mind becomes radiant, the mind becomes malleable, the mind becomes clear. And in that purity, in that radiance, in that clarity, then one can see very clearly. It's when we have a problem and we're confused, we're overcome by anxiety and doubt and stress, we can't see the problem because we're too close to it. It is only when we become more peaceful, more clear, and we put some space between ourselves and the problem, then we can understand it as it is and know it in a different way. And so too, when the mind is strengthened by the purity of concentration, then that mind can become freed from the corruptions. The corruptions in Buddhism is those things that lead to defilements of the mind. It disturbs the mind, distorts the mind, and makes the mind impure. And those defilements are three taints. They are the taints of sensual desire, the taint of always looking for pleasure through the body. If one is always seeking pleasure through the body, then the mind cannot be at peace. How can the mind be happy if one's always looking for pleasant sights, sounds, taste, smell and touch? That always sends the mind outward to the world. The pure mind, the still mind, is when the mind is content. We've experienced those times when our mind has come to stillness and peace. That's when we're inwardly happy, inwardly content. It's not when we're searching and seeking more pleasure, but we're happy with what we have. When we're happy then the mind can go inward. Also, one of the corruptions that distort and distill the mind is this desiring for eternal existence. This is this always wanting to be, to become, to do. This is the fear arises because of this sense of I exist. And anything that threatens the I brings up fear. So we can never find security because of this view of self, this sense of always trying to perpetuate being. And then the other corruption of mind is wrong view. Wrong view is to not see the Four Noble Truths, to not see why we suffer, to not see the cause of suffering, to not see that there is a release from suffering, and to not understand the path to that release. So to not understand, why am I suffering? Why is there unhappiness? To not see that there is dukkha, there is suffering, there is unsatisfactoriness. With birth, there must be old age, sickness, and death. And that is a natural consequence, a natural cause of having been born. There is the arising of things and passing away. And because all things must arise and must pass away, that makes them unsatisfactory to attach to and to hold on to. One allows them to come and go. And when one sees that there is this arising and passing away, then nothing is stable, nothing can be held on to. No security can be found in the world which constantly changes. And because of that, then the world is unsatisfactory. And then what causes the dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness? It is craving. It is a desire for things not to change. We desire not to be separated from what we love. But is that possible? We desire to have only pleasure and never experience pain. But is that possible? We desire to only have pleasant experiences. But is that possible? We desire only good health, not ill health. But is that possible? We desire not to grow old and not to die. But that's not possible. And so we see that the changing nature of existence causes suffering because of our desire and clinging to things to be a certain way. And then this wrong view that we do not see that there is a path out, there is an escape, there is a liberation. By giving up craving, giving up desire, then we're freed from suffering. We allow nature to take its course. And also to know that there is a pathway